Nathan Cooper had exactly 37 minutes before the bank locked him out of his own life, and he was spending them sitting in his rusted pickup outside a pharmacy he couldn't afford, watching his 7-year-old son struggle to breathe in the passenger seat. Eli's small chest rose in sharp, uneven gasps, each one sounding like it might be the last. And the inhaler Nathan had promised to refill sat empty in his trembling hand. Across the street, a foreclosure notice flapped violently against the front door of their house, bright red against chipped white paint, screaming to the world what Nathan had tried so hard to hide that he had failed. Failed as a provider. Failed as a father. Failed at everything except loving the boy beside him so fiercely it hurt to even exist. His phone buzzed. Once. Twice. A third time. Unknown number. Normally, he would have ignored it. Today, something made him answer. The voice on the other end was calm, precise, and completely detached from reality. "Mr. Cooper, we have a job for you. Compensation $500,000. Nathan almost laughed until the voice continued. "No experience required. Only discretion. And your willingness to lie." He tightened his grip on the steering wheel, eyes flicking to Eli, whose breathing was getting worse. "What kind of lie?" he asked, his voice cracking under the weight of everything collapsing around him. A pause. Then, "The kind that will change your life." Before Nathan could respond, a sleek black limousine rolled silently to a stop beside his broken truck, its polished surface reflecting a version of him that looked smaller, weaker, disposable. The tinted window slid down just enough to reveal a woman inside, sharp eyes, flawless composure, and a presence that felt like power itself had taken human form. "Get in, Mr. Cooper," she said, her voice low, controlled, undeniable. "Or walk away and lose everything." Nathan looked at his son, looked at the pharmacy, looked at the house he was about to lose. And in that single moment, with everything on the line, he made a choice that would pull him into a world of lies, betrayal, and power far beyond anything he understood. Because what he didn't know, what no one could have prepared him for, was that this wasn't just a job. It was a test. And before it was over, someone would offer him $500,000 to betray the only person who might actually save him. Nathan Cooper hesitated for only a fraction of a second before reaching across the cracked leather seat and squeezing Eli's hand, his voice low but steady in a way that masked the storm tearing through him. "Stay right here, buddy. I'm not going far." And Eli nodded weakly, trusting him with the kind of blind faith that made Nathan's chest ache as he stepped out of the truck and into a world that already felt like it didn't belong to him. The limousine door opening with a quiet, almost predatory smoothness, as if it had been waiting for this exact moment, and the woman inside didn't move to greet him, didn't offer a smile, didn't even acknowledge the desperation written all over his face. She simply watched him with calm, calculating eyes that seemed to measure his worth in silence before she spoke. Close the door, and something about her tone made it clear that this was not a request. Nathan obeyed without thinking, the heavy door sealing shut behind him and cutting off the outside world like a line had been drawn between who he had been and who he was about to become. The interior smelled faintly of leather and something expensive he couldn't name, and for the first time in a long time, he felt acutely aware of his worn boots, his calloused hands, the faint scent of grease and sweat clinging to his clothes. She noticed it too. Of course she did. But if she judged him, she didn't show it. "My name is Victoria Hale," she said, as if the name itself carried weight. He was supposed to recognize, and maybe it did in some other world. One where men like him didn't spend their nights fixing broken pipes and counting pennies. Nathan swallowed. "You said something about a job." His voice came out rougher than he intended, but she didn't react. She simply slid a thin folder across the seat toward him, its surface pristine, untouched by the kind of life he lived. "Open it," she said, and he did, flipping through pages filled with clean lines of text legal language. He barely understood numbers that made his head spin. $250,000. The figure stood out like a spotlight, unreal, impossible. His eyes flicked up to her, searching for the catch, because there had to be one. There was always a catch. "This is a contract marriage," she said plainly, as if she were discussing something as ordinary as the weather. 6 months. "You will live with me, attend public events, and present yourself as my husband. In return, you will receive half the payment up front, the rest upon completion." Nathan blinked, trying to process the absurdity of it. "You want me to pretend to be your husband?" he repeated. And for the first time there was the faintest flicker of something in her eyes. Not amusement, not exactly, but something close to curiosity. "Yes," she said. "That is exactly what I want." He let out a breath, shaking his head slightly. "Why me?" "Because it didn't make sense." None of it did. She could have chosen anyone. Someone polished, someone who belonged in her world, not a man whose life was falling apart piece by piece. She studied him for a moment longer than was comfortable, as if deciding how much truth to reveal. "Because you are invisible," she said finally. "Men like you are underestimated, ignored. No one will suspect you. And more importantly, you need this." Her gaze dropped briefly, not to his face, but to his hands, to the faint tremor he couldn't quite hide, to the desperation he wore, like a second skin, and he hated that she was right, hated that she could see straight through him. "I have a son," he said quietly. The words slipping out before he could stop them, because that was the only thing that mattered, the only thing that could make him walk away or step forward. "He's sick. I can't." This isn't, his voice faltered, and for a moment the weight of everything threatened to crush him right there in the back of that immaculate car. Victoria didn't interrupt, didn't offer comfort. She simply listened. And when he finished, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope, placing it on the seat between them. "That is $50,000, she said. "Consider it an advance. No contract signed, no obligation. Use it however you need. If you choose to walk away, you keep it." Nathan stared at the envelope as if it might disappear if he blinked. $50,000. It was more money than he had ever seen in his life, more than enough to cover Eli's medication, to stall the bank to breathe again. And yet something about it felt dangerous, like stepping onto thin ice without knowing how deep the water beneath it was. "Why would you do that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, and this time Victoria's expression shifted just slightly, a shadow passing behind her eyes. "Because I need you to understand what is at stake," she said. "And because once you accept the rest, there is no turning back." The words hung in the air, heavy, final. Nathan leaned back against the seat, running a hand over his face, trying to think, trying to see past the immediate relief that money could bring. But all he could picture was Eli struggling to breathe, Eli trusting him to fix something he couldn't fix. And suddenly, the decision didn't feel like a choice at all. It felt like survival. "What's the catch?" he asked again, more firmly this time, because he needed to hear it, needed to know what he was stepping into. Victoria's gaze sharpened. "You will not ask questions about my business," she said. "You will not interfere in my affairs. You will follow my instructions exactly. And under no circumstances will you break character in public. If you do, the contract is void." She paused, then added, "And Mr. Cooper, there are people who would benefit from seeing me fail. You will be seen as a liability." You need to understand that a chill ran through him at the implication. But he nodded slowly, absorbing it. Danger, risk. It was all abstract compared to the very real threat of losing everything he had. 6 months, he repeated, as if grounding himself in the time frame. 6 months, she confirmed. "And then you walk away with $250,000. He let out a breath, long and heavy, his mind racing through possibilities, consequences, what-ifs that all seemed distant compared to the immediate reality pressing in on him. He thought about saying no, about stepping out of the car and going back to the life he understood, even if it was falling apart. But then he thought about Eli again, about the way his son had looked at him just minutes ago, trusting him to make things right, and something inside him shifted, hardened. "Okay," he said finally, the word feeling both too small and too heavy for what it meant. Victoria didn't react outwardly, but there was a subtle change in the air, as if something had just been set in motion that couldn't be undone. She reached for another document, sliding it toward him along with a pen. "Then sign," she said, and he did his hand steady despite everything. The ink marking the moment his life split into before and after. When he finished, she took the papers back, glancing over them briefly before placing them neatly into her folder. "Good," she said. And then, just like that, the tone shifted. Business concluded. Decision made. "We leave now," she added, and Nathan blinked. "Now," he echoed. A flicker of panic rising in his chest as he thought of Eli still waiting in the truck. Victoria followed his gaze as if she could see through the tinted glass to where his world still sat fragile and uncertain. "Your son will be taken care of," she said calmly. "A driver will take him to a private clinic, the best in the city. Everything will be handled." Nathan stiffened, instinct screaming at him to object to protect, but there was something in her certainty that made him hesitate. "I need to be with him," he insisted, and for the first time there was a hint of steel in her voice that left no room for argument. "And you will be," she said, "but not like this, not as a man who can't pay for his care. If you want to save your son, Mr. Cooper, then you need to trust me." The words hit harder than he expected, cutting straight through his pride. His fear. Everything that made this feel wrong, because at the core of it, she was offering him something he couldn't give his son on his own. A chance. A real chance. He closed his eyes for a brief second, then nodded, the decision settling into place. And within minutes, the limousine was moving, pulling away from the curb, from the life he had known. Nathan turned his head, watching through the tinted window as his truck grew smaller, as Eli was gently guided out by a man in a crisp suit, as the chaos of his old world faded into the distance, replaced by something unknown, something dangerous, something that felt like stepping into a story that had already begun without him. He didn't know where it would lead, didn't know what it would cost, but as the city skyline rose ahead of them, gleaming and untouchable, one thing became painfully clear. There was no going back, not anymore. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the fear and the doubt, there was a quiet, unfamiliar spark hope, fragile and dangerous, flickering to life for the first time in a long time, because maybe, just maybe, this impossible, reckless choice would be the thing that saved everything. Nathan Cooper didn't realize just how completely his world had changed until the elevator doors opened into a penthouse that didn't feel real. A place suspended above the city, like it existed outside of time and consequence. Glass walls stretching endlessly to reveal a skyline he had only ever seen from the ground, distant and unreachable. And for a moment, he simply stood there, frozen between the man he had been and the role he had agreed to play, while Victoria Hale walked past him without hesitation, already at home in a life built on control and precision. "You'll adjust," she said without turning back, as if she could sense the storm inside him, and maybe she could, because everything about her suggested she noticed more than she let on. Nathan stepped inside slowly, his boots too heavy on polished marble, his presence too loud in a place that thrived on quiet power, and almost immediately, the invisible lines of hierarchy made themselves known. Staff members appeared from nowhere, their movements efficient, eyes sharp, measuring him in the same silent way Victoria had earlier, except theirs carried something colder judgment. Doubt dismissal. One of them, a woman in a tailored suit with a tablet pressed against her chest, paused just long enough to look him up and down before leaning slightly toward Victoria, her voice low but not low enough. "Is this wise?" she asked, and Victoria didn't break stride. "It's necessary," she replied, and that was the end of it, at least on the surface. But Nathan felt it. The unspoken tension, the resistance. the sense that he didn't belong here and never would. And yet somehow, by signing that contract, he had forced his way into a world that would not easily accept him. The next few hours passed in a blur of instructions, a team brought in to reshape him. Clothes he had never worn, placed in front of him like armor, he didn't know how to use. A stylist adjusting his posture, correcting the way he walked, spoke even how he held eye contact. Confidence, they repeated. You need to look like you belong beside her. And Nathan tried. He really did. But every mirror he faced reflected someone he barely recognized, someone pretending to be stronger, cleaner, more controlled than he felt inside and through it all. Victoria watched from a distance, not interfering, not offering reassurance, just observing as if this transformation was another calculated move in a much larger game. By the time night fell, Nathan stood in a tailored suit that fit him perfectly, but felt like a lie wrapped around his skin, and when Victoria finally approached him again, her gaze lingered for a fraction longer than usual. Assessing, recalibrating. You'll do, she said simply. But there was something beneath it, something quieter, almost approving. And before he could respond, she added, We have an event tonight. Nathan blinked. Tonight, he repeated, still trying to catch up with the speed at which his life was moving. She nodded. Our first appearance as a married couple. The words hit differently when said out loud, heavier, more real. And suddenly this wasn't just a contract on paper, it was a performance, one that the entire world would be watching. The event was unlike anything Nathan had ever experienced. A sea of wealth and influence gathered under one roof. Conversations layered with hidden meanings, smiles that didn't quite reach the eyes, cameras flashing as Victoria entered the room with Nathan at her side, and in that instant every gaze shifted toward them. Curiosity, speculation, calculation. Nathan felt it like pressure against his chest, but he remembered the training, the posture, the quiet confidence he had been forced to adopt. And he matched Victoria's pace, his hand lightly at her back, as if it belonged there. As if he had done this 1,000 times before. Relax, she murmured under her breath without looking at him. They can smell fear, and somehow that almost made him smile because fear was the only thing he was certain of right now. The questions came quickly, reporters eager to understand the sudden marriage that had taken everyone by surprise. Mr. Cooper, how did you meet Miss Hale? When did this relationship begin? Why keep it secret until now? Nathan answered as rehearsed, the lies flowing easier than he expected, because they were built on fragments of truth, small details carefully crafted to feel real. And for a while it worked. The narrative held until a new voice cut through the noise, sharper, colder. Or perhaps the better question is why now? Nathan turned, following the source of the voice, and that's when he saw her. Clara Whitmore, the COO, the woman whose presence seemed to bend the room in subtle ways. Her smile polite, but her eyes anything but. A sudden marriage just as the board is set to vote on control measures. She continued stepping closer, her gaze flicking between Nathan and Victoria. Quite the coincidence. Victoria's expression didn't change, but Nathan felt the shift beside him, the tension coiling tighter. I don't recall my personal life requiring your approval, Clara, she said coolly, and Clara's smile widened just slightly. Of course not, she replied. I simply find timing interesting. Her eyes settled on Nathan, studying him in a way that felt far more invasive than the others had been, as if she were peeling back layers, searching for something beneath the surface. And for a split second, Nathan wondered if she could see it, the truth, the contract, the lie they were both living. But then she tilted her head, stepping back. Welcome to the family, Mr. Cooper, she said, her tone carrying a weight he didn't fully understand yet. I'm sure you'll find it enlightening. And with that, she was gone, disappearing into the crowd as if she had never been there, but the air she left behind felt heavier, more dangerous. The rest of the night passed in a blur of introductions and conversations that danced around unspoken agendas. Nathan played his part, stayed close to Victoria, mirrored her calm, her control, and gradually something unexpected began to happen. The line between pretending and being started to blur, small moments slipping through the cracks of the performance, like when a reporter pushed too aggressively and Nathan instinctively stepped forward, shielding Victoria without thinking. Or when their hands brushed and neither of them pulled away immediately. These were not part of the contract, not rehearsed, not calculated, and yet they felt real in a way the rest of the night did not. By the time they returned to the penthouse, the silence between them was different, less formal, less distant. Nathan loosened his tie, exhaling slowly as the weight of the evening settled over him. "You didn't tell me about her," he said, finally breaking the quiet. Victoria moved toward the window, her reflection merging with the city lights beyond. "Clara. Whitmore is ambitious," she replied, "and dangerous." Nathan frowned. "She thinks this marriage is a move." Victoria's lips curved slightly, though there was no humor in it. "It is," she said, turning to face him, "just not in the way she believes." He hesitated, then asked the question that had been building all night. Why me, really? Because the answer she had given before no longer felt like the whole truth. Victoria held his gaze, and for a moment the carefully constructed walls around her seemed to crack just slightly. "Because I needed someone who wouldn't already be part of this world," she said quietly. "Someone who hasn't been shaped by it, or corrupted by it." The words hung between them heavier than anything she had said before, and Nathan felt something shift inside him. A recognition that this wasn't just about power or strategy, that there was something deeper driving her choices, something personal. "You don't trust them," he said, and she didn't deny it. "I trust very few people," she replied, then added after a brief pause, "and right now, you are one of them." The admission caught him off guard, not because of what she said, but because of how she said it. Not as a calculated move, but as a truth she hadn't intended to reveal, and in that moment, the dynamic between them changed. Subtly but unmistakably, he wasn't just a tool in her plan anymore. He was something else. Something she had chosen, and for reasons he didn't fully understand, that mattered. The following days only deepened that complexity. Nathan learned the rhythms of her world, the constant balancing act between public perception and private reality, the meetings where every word was a weapon. The way Victoria navigated it all with a precision that bordered on ruthless, and yet in the quieter moments he saw glimpses of something different. The way her shoulders relaxed slightly when Eli laughed during a video call. The way her voice softened almost imperceptibly when she asked about his condition. The way she lingered just a second longer than necessary in conversations that had nothing to do with business. And Eli, in turn, seemed to accept her presence with an openness that surprised Nathan. "She's not scary," he said one evening through the screen, smiling in that unguarded way only children could. "She's just sad." Nathan had glanced at Victoria then, catching the brief flicker of emotion she couldn't quite hide, and for the first time he wondered what she had lost to become the woman she was now. But the illusion of control didn't last, because in a world built on power, nothing remained stable for long. The cracks began to show in subtle ways: a delayed meeting, a document that didn't add up, a board member whose loyalty seemed to shift without warning, and always Clara's presence just beneath the surface, watching, waiting, calculating. And Nathan could feel it building, the tension tightening like a wire pulled too far. He didn't know exactly what was coming, but he knew enough to understand one thing. This wasn't just a fake marriage anymore. It was a battlefield. And somewhere in the middle of it, without realizing when or how it had happened, he had stopped being just a man playing a role and started becoming someone who actually cared what happened next. Not just for himself, not just for Eli, but for Victoria too. And that made everything more dangerous because the more real it became, the more it had the power to break him when it all inevitably fell apart. The first crack didn't come with shouting or headlines. It came in silence in a boardroom that felt too still, too controlled. The kind of quiet that meant something had already gone wrong long before anyone spoke, and Nathan Cooper knew it the moment he stepped inside and saw the empty chair at the head of the table where Victoria Hale should have been. The seat that had always anchored the room, now nothing more than a symbol of absence, and every pair of eyes turned toward him, not with curiosity this time, but with something sharper. Expectation mixed with suspicion, because overnight everything had changed. The media was already spinning stories, whispers of fraud manipulation, a marriage of convenience used to secure control. And Nathan could feel it closing in from all sides, the lie they had carefully constructed now twisting into something dangerous, something that could destroy not just Victoria's position, but everything she had built. And when the doors opened again, it wasn't her who walked in. It was Clara Whitmore, composed as ever, her presence filling the void like she had been waiting for this exact moment. "Mr. Cooper?" she greeted smoothly, her voice carrying just enough warmth to feel false. "I was hoping we'd have a chance to speak privately." And before Nathan could respond, she gestured toward the hallway, not asking, already knowing he would follow, because curiosity and unease had a way of pulling people exactly where they weren't supposed to go. The corridor outside was quiet, insulated from the chaos brewing behind closed doors, and Clara didn't waste time. "You're out of your depth," she said plainly. "No pretense, no politeness, just truth delivered like a blade. This world, it doesn't forgive mistakes." Nathan crossed his arms, slightly holding his ground. "Then why am I still here?" he shot back. And for a moment, something like amusement flickered in her eyes. "Because you're useful," she replied, stepping closer, her voice lowering. "But usefulness has a shelf life." She reached into her bag, then pulling out a sleek folder and placing it in his hands, heavier than it looked. "Open it," and against his better judgment, he did. The first page was enough to make his stomach drop. Photos, documents, timelines, everything laid out in cold. Undeniable detail. The contract marriage, the financial transfers, the legal loopholes Victoria had exploited to maintain control of the company. All of it arranged in a way that painted a very specific picture. Not strategy, not survival, but manipulation, deception, fraud. "It's not illegal," Nathan said quickly, though even to his own ears it sounded more like hope than certainty. Clara tilted her head slightly. "No," she agreed. "Not yet." Her finger tapped lightly against the page, but with the right testimony, the right narrative, it becomes something else entirely. She let the implications settle before continuing. "The board is already shifting. Investors are nervous. Public perception is fragile. All it takes is one credible voice to confirm what everyone is starting to suspect." Her eyes lifted to meet his. Steady, calculating. "You." The word hung between them, heavier than anything that had come before. Nathan's grip tightened on the folder, his pulse loud in his ears. "You want me to lie," he said, though he already knew the answer. Clara's smile was slow, deliberate. "I want you to tell your version of the truth," she corrected. "A man like you, pulled into a situation you didn't fully understand, manipulated by a powerful CEO, desperate to hold on to control. It's believable, sympathetic even." She paused, letting the narrative take shape in his mind, and in return she added softly, "You walk away with $500,000. The number hit harder this time, heavier, more real, because now it wasn't just an offer. It was a choice. One laid out clearly in front of him. One path leading to security, to a future where Eli never had to struggle again, where the weight that had been crushing Nathan for years simply disappeared, and the other was uncertain, dangerous. Tied to a woman whose world was already starting to collapse around her. Half up front. Clara continued as if she could sense the shift in his thoughts. "The rest after your statement. Enough to pay for any treatment your son might ever need. Enough to make sure you never have to choose between medicine and rent again." She leaned in slightly, her voice almost a whisper now. All you have to do is walk away. The simplicity of it was what made it so dangerous, because for the first time Nathan could see it clearly, a way out that didn't involve sacrifice, that didn't require him to keep pretending to keep risking everything for a situation he had never truly been part of. And yet, as he stood there, the weight of that choice pressing down on him. Something else surfaced, something quieter but harder to ignore. A memory of Eli's voice, small and certain. You always say we do the right thing, and it cut through the noise, through the fear and the temptation, leaving him standing in the space between who he had been and who he was about to become. Clara straightened, then sensing his hesitation, her tone sharpening just slightly. Don't mistake this for generosity, she said. If you don't take this offer, someone else will. And when they do, you won't just lose the money. You'll lose everything. The threat was subtle but clear, and for a moment Nathan felt the old instinct rise up, the need to protect, to survive, to take whatever chance was given, no matter the cost. He thought about Eli again, about the hospital bills, the uncertainty, the fear of not being enough, and for a split second the answer seemed obvious. Take the money, walk away, let someone else deal with the consequences. But then another image surfaced, Victoria standing at the window. The city reflected in her eyes the brief moment where her guard had dropped, where she had admitted trust in a world where trust was a liability, and suddenly this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about what that trust meant, about what it would cost to break it. Nathan closed the folder slowly, his decision settling into place. Not with certainty, but with a kind of quiet resolve that felt heavier than anything else he had carried. He handed it back to her, his voice steady despite the storm still raging inside him. No, he said. And for the first time, Clara's composure slipped just a fraction, a flicker of something sharp and dangerous crossing her expression before it smoothed out again. Think carefully, Mr. Cooper, she warned. Opportunities like this don't come twice. Nathan met her gaze without backing down. Neither do chances to do the right thing, he replied. And with that he turned, walking away before he could second-guess himself, before the weight of what he had just refused had time to fully settle in, because he knew it would later, when the consequences came, when the easy path he had rejected came back to haunt him. But for now, as he pushed open the door and stepped back into the chaos of a world on the edge of collapse, one thing was clear. He had made his choice, and whatever happened next, he would face it as the man his son believed him to be. Not the one fear had almost turned him into. The courtroom felt colder than any boardroom. Nathan had stepped into a place where power didn't shout, but pressed down quietly, relentlessly. And as he sat beside Victoria Hale, he could feel the weight of everything that had led them here tightening around them both. Reporters lining the back rows, investors watching with carefully hidden anxiety, and at the center of it all, Clara Whitmore standing with the kind of confidence that only came from believing she had already won her case, laid out with precision. Every detail of the contract marriage twisted into something darker, something illegal, something designed to make Victoria look like a desperate CEO willing to manipulate anything to hold on to control. And for a moment it almost worked. The narrative was clean, believable, dangerous, until the judge turned toward Nathan and asked the one question that would decide everything. Mr. Cooper, can you confirm the nature of your relationship with Ms. Hale? The room went still. Every breath held, every eye fixed on him. And in that silence, Nathan felt it all again, the weight of the choice he had made, the money he had walked away from, the easier path he had refused, and for a brief second, doubt flickered, because this was the moment where everything could still change, where one sentence could secure a future free of struggle, free of fear. But then he glanced at Victoria just for a second, and what he saw wasn't the powerful CEO the world feared. It was the woman who had trusted him when she didn't trust anyone else. The woman who had quietly ensured his son could breathe again without ever asking for anything in return. And something inside him steadied. At first, he began his voice clear despite the tension gripping the room. It was a contract. A ripple moved through the crowd, Clara's lips curving slightly in anticipation, but Nathan didn't stop. But that's not the whole truth. he continued. And now every word mattered, every pause deliberate. The contract didn't create something fake. It created space for something real. Clara's expression shifted just slightly, the first crack in her control. Ms. Hale didn't manipulate me. Nathan went on, his gaze unwavering. She gave me a choice when I had none. And everything she did was to protect her company from people who were already trying to tear it apart. He turned then, not to the judge but toward the board members seated behind Clara, including her. The room erupted in murmurs, tension snapping as the balance shifted, and Nathan reached into his jacket, pulling out a small flash drive, the one piece of truth Clara hadn't accounted for. Before this trial, I didn't understand the full picture, he admitted. But I do now. The evidence that followed was undeniable. Financial records, internal communications, Clara's own calculated moves to destabilize the company to force a vote to seize control under the guise of protecting it, and as it unfolded piece by piece, the confidence drained from her posture, replaced by something far less controlled, something closer to panic. The judge's ruling came faster than anyone expected. Decisive final, Clara Whitmore removed charges pending Victoria Hale, cleared of all allegations, and just like that, the power in the room flipped completely. The same people who had doubted her now avoided her gaze. The same voices that had whispered against her now fell silent. And through it all, Nathan stood there not as a pawn, not as a desperate man clinging to survival, but as someone who had chosen something harder, something that couldn't be bought outside the courthouse. The noise returned. Reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing, but none of it seemed to matter anymore. Because for the first time since this had all begun, the fight was over. Victoria turned to him. Then her composure still intact, but softer, somehow less guarded. "You could have taken the money," she said quietly, and Nathan gave a small, almost tired smile. "Yeah," he admitted. "I could have." There was a pause, not uncomfortable, just real. And then she added, "The contract is over." The words hung there, marking the end of everything that had brought them together, and yet neither of them moved to leave, because what had grown between them no longer fit within the limits of an agreement. Nathan nodded slowly. "I know," he said. But he didn't step away, and neither did she. Days later, the penthouse felt different, quieter. Not because anything had changed physically, but because the tension that had once filled it was gone, replaced by something unfamiliar, something steady. Eli's laughter echoed through the space as he ran across the living room, healthier now, stronger, his small hand reaching instinctively for Victoria's as he pulled her toward whatever new game he had decided they were all part of, and she followed without hesitation. A faint smile breaking through the control she had worn for so long. Nathan watched them from a distance, the weight he had carried for years finally easing in a way he hadn't thought possible, not because of money, not because of security, but because for once he had made a choice he didn't have to regret. Victoria glanced back at him, then their eyes meeting in a moment that didn't need words, because everything that mattered had already been said. And as the city stretched out beyond the glass, vast and unpredictable, it no longer felt like something to fear, but something to step into together or apart. It didn't matter as much as it once had, because what remained wasn't a contract or a transaction, it was trust hard-earned and unbreakable, and for both of them. That was worth more than anything they had almost lost.